To my dear friends, family, and folks at home, hi, hello, how are you? And welcome to another episode of D-Talk with David Day. I'm your host, David Day, and thank you for joining me. Today, we are going to get into something very specific, and I'm so excited to bring this episode of the podcast to you because this is actually a project that I am creating for a class that I'm in. Currently, right now, I am studying for a Master's of Education with a specialization in neuroscience. What we're going to do is we're going to look at Bill 15, which is an education bill that moved through the Legislative Assembly back in 2020. And we're just going to talk about it and look through it through an educational lens. So if you're somebody who's interested in education and maybe a little bit of history of education, this episode is so going to be for you. And maybe if you don't know you're interested in it, stick around and we'll see. So without further ado, I'd love to bring you this presentation, and let's get into it right now. We'll be right back. All right, hello and welcome to my final project. Today we are going to be looking at Bill 15, which is the Choice in Education Act that went through the Alberta Legislature back in 2020. We're going to be looking at this presentation here that's on the left of the screen. So on our agenda today, first we are going to define Bill 15, what is it? And then we're going to look at the connections to educational theories. There's 3 educational theories that we're going to use as kind of a framework for our discussion today. And then finally, we're going to look at the impacts and arguments and a little bit of the social context about Bill 15 and how that influences things. So let's get right into it. What is Bill 15? In May 2020, the Education Minister of the Alberta government, her name is Adriana LaGrange, read Bill 15 for the first time in Legislative Assembly, and this is what she said. This legislation, if passed, will protect and strengthen choice within a vibrant and diversified education system through amendments to the Education Act. This proposed legislation will affirm that parents, not politicians, have the right to choose the kind of education they feel will be best for their children. Pin that, that's coming back. This bill shows our government's commitment to offering education options that allow parents to select the path that they feel will best help their children reach their full potential. With this legislation, we are protecting Alberta's long history of educational choice, including public and separate schools, francophone schools, charter schools, independent schools, early childhood education, and home education. Now, we are going to listen to Minister LaGrange describe Bill 15.
As the Premier said, our province's education system has a long and successful history of offering a number of options for parents to choose the education path that suits the needs of their children. Alberta parents know best. They know what their children need to find success in their education.
They know what their children need. This theme comes up a lot here in that parents need to be able to decide. Parents know what is best.
And Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act, affirms this while recognizing that the breadth of choice and variety of school types available in Alberta is integral to our education system. I know firsthand how valuable it is to have different options available to parents to educate their children in the way that they feel most comfortable.
It's the language here, right? In the way that they feel most comfortable. There is a level of subtext that I hear and that I see building here within this conversation, but we're not going to get to that subtext until the very end, so make sure you stick around.
To support the introduction of this legislation, we are also releasing a report today that summarizes the highlights from the Choice in Education survey. I want to thank the more than 50,000 Albertans who contributed their time to take the survey and share their views on educational choice.
We're not going to look at that survey here today, but I did look through it. And the funniest thing about that survey is that the majority of respondents were people that said they worked in schools, which was really interesting to me. I don't know what kind of bias that leads to, but I feel like that's a problem with scientific inquiry. So essentially, Bill 15 is providing more money and more funding for charter schools in Alberta. There are, I believe it was 14 or 16 charter schools that are already in operation in Alberta, and that ranges. So there were charter schools that have an Indigenous focus. There are charter schools that have a fine arts focus and a singing focus and things like that. So these charter schools are built for a specific kind of structure that will ideally benefit the child because they were given that choice. So now we're going to watch this short video about what charter schools are.
Albertans have been asking, what are public charter schools? Parents are asking, can I help choose a meaningful education for my child? Will it accept and meet my child's needs without losing the benefits of public schools? The answer is yes. Public charter schools are one way you can. Belonging to an educational community that suits the particular needs and aptitudes of your children is a dream that's real in Alberta public schools. You see, Alberta's public charter schools are unique in Canada. So what is a public charter school? Firstly, public charter schools are publicly funded schools. They are started and operated by groups of parents or educators, hire professional teachers and administrators, and have elected boards. Each school must fulfill a charter mandate approved by the Minister of Education and uphold the laws, regulations, and standards affecting public schools. Each school's unique charter focuses on a specific learning approach. These schools deliver programs that include traditional education approaches, at-risk youth programming, underachieving student programs, English as a second language, arts immersion, Indigenous teaching, nurturing confident girls, musically immersed, character and leadership, gifted learning, rural leadership community, inquiry-based outdoor and experiential education, and more. Some view public charter schools the same as private schools. That's simply not true. Unlike a private school, we can only be operated by a non-profit organization. We can't have a religious affiliation. We can't turn students who fit within a charter away as long as we have space and resources for them. And we can't charge tuition or make a profit by teaching them.
Oh.
Some of our schools have been recognized as among the best in the province by
I was
various
wrong.
educational researchers.
You don't have to pay.
Belonging to a learning community you believe in, that truly helps students become everything they can be, is a reality that Alberta's public charter schools proudly support.
Okay, so a lot of good information in there, and I feel like that breaks down the barrier of people not understanding charter schools as well. I definitely thought you would have to pay tuition in a charter school, which is just not the case in Alberta. I find it really interesting as well that Alberta is the only province or territory in Canada that has public charter schools. And that's the thing too, the language is very specific there, public charter schools. Even though it's still a charter school, it is publicly accessed. And it's not the same as, it's not a private school, and that's not the same as what we see in the United States. So that's a really important delineation there. Now that we understand not only what Bill 15 is and what a charter school is and what that looks like in Alberta, we're going to have a look through 3 different educational theories and talk about charter schools. So the first one here is social efficiency. The second one is called child-centered progressivism. And the last one is called essentialism. So we're going to dive right on in right now to social efficiency. Now, social efficiency is the theory of education where science informs everything. Everything is done to such a scientific level, and those standards are upheld in order to create and maintain a predictable and orderly world. Right away, when students enter the classroom, they are put in boxes of what they can do and what they can't and their aptitudes, and they are groomed for the role that people think that that child is going to have in the world. Students are prepared for their specific role in the world and nothing more, because that would be a waste of time. So a big argument here is that we know exactly what our world is going to be like when this child grows up. So let's teach them exactly what they need to know in order to survive and nothing more. Nothing is vague. Everything is absolute. This is how it's done. This is how it's always been done. And this is how it's always going to be. So the intent of a socially efficient education is to create a first-class man. Oof, I don't like that sentence. Let's talk about now social efficiency and how they would view the lens of having those public charter schools. Anybody who fully believes in social efficiency would think charter schools are awful and that they're a waste of time. Because a charter school, the whole point of a charter school is to have a diversified education experience that can extend to all of those things that we saw in the video, right? Indigenous education, art infused, building strong girls. I love that one. Like, it's just diversifying the education experience based off of the unknown of the world. When you put your child in a fine arts elementary school, there's a chance that they're not going to come out being fine arts. They might not like it. They might not grow in it. You can put your child into a sports school, but they might not like it or be an athlete as they grow up and out. Now, that would be seen as a waste of time and a failure by people who support social efficiency. They don't want any ambiguity. They don't want music. They're not looking for a diversified experience. Everybody needs to be able to do the exact same thing so they can operate in the world in a meaningful way. And the effects of social efficiency we can still see in some Alberta schools and probably schools across the world. It's the attitude of children are inherently bad and we need to manage them, right? The teachers who are yellers, the teachers who have exclusionary discipline, the teachers who participate in all of these things as to control the child. I never struggled with any of that because I don't view my students through this social efficiency lens. I've done the exclusionary discipline. I've tried it. I was desperate, so I tried it, didn't work, next strategy. But those strategies are there and sometimes they linger with specific people in schools. Now, the impacts of social efficiency here really reveal the idea that we don't want people to be diversified. We don't want pluralism. We want everybody to be built in the image of the exact same entity, right? And that is very social efficiency as well. So this idea of going out and having different experiences in the world in order to construct your own sense of self, that's not social efficiency. That's not their vibe. They don't want you to learn things and feel special and unique. They want you to sit down and do your homework so you can age through the system and then go work in the factory. Henry Ford, who came up with the 40-hour work week, social efficiency. So the next educational theory that we're going to have a look at is called child-centered progressivism. Now, this is the idea that the world is so broad and you just don't know what it's going to look like. And in the age of technology and construction, we need to develop the most differentiated and broad curriculum of instruction to deliver to our students so they are able to navigate the ever-changing world. And you may notice that even in the tone of my voice has changed. And this is that idea of child-centered progressivism. You need to, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just read this here. So I went off all dramatic, but child-centered progressivism is that you cannot prepare students for any specific set of conditions in the future. So the most meaningful and effective learning for students comes through social situations. So child-centered progressivism sees schools as a social activity, and so much learning happens through that social exchange with other people, students and adults in the building. So through social demands, students are stimulated to act as a member of a team. So through responses of others, the learner identifies what their learning means in social terms. So individualism and insight into each learner's capacities, interests, and habits are essential to child-centered progressivism, and this thinks of school as a social institution. So your role as the teacher is to pay attention to every student. It sounds so wild, but through the social efficiency lens, you don't really need to pay attention to every student. You just throw them the math book and then everybody does the same thing, right? But this is like project-based learning and working together and just having this big collaborative space. You know, a child-centered progressivism built classroom is going to have dynamic seating and dynamic lighting and textures. And if we're thinking about child-centered progressivism and looking at charter schools through the lens of CCP, it's just such a long title. If we're looking at child-centered progressivism with charter schools, I think that absolutely fits hand in hand with the way that we are looking at charter schools right here, is that every student has unique capabilities and they are all individuals that need to be educationally nourished in diverse ways. And what a beautiful way to nourish all these diversities through all the different kinds of charter schools that exist out in the world, right? There are so many options through child-centered progressivism, and this can have a profound effect on students that are in schools that they feel like they belong in and that they can thrive in, right? So my example here of child-centered progressivism would be my middle school experience. So I went through a separate school. So I was in the Catholic system for middle school, but it was also a fine arts middle school. So we kind of had two different specialized pieces here, which would both be seen by a waste of time by social efficiency, which I do love, and we need to note that. My experience was so diversified because not only was it Catholicism we are focusing our studies through, we are also spending so much time in the fine arts, and we had so much time spent doing fine arts. It was almost every day we had 3 or 4 blocks of, it was either dance, drama, art, choir, band. And then we did have an option in there too. We spent so much time not working on the 3 R's, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. We would be out, we would go to nationals in Atlanta and perform our play for a week. And we would go to Edmonton and do the Kiwanis Speech Festival. And we would be doing all these things. We would be mounting a show at the local theater and doing that for 2 weeks. Like Tech Week was so long. The Christmas concert, the spring show, the band show, the drama show. There's just so many things that we spent our time doing that was not reading, writing, and arithmetic. So this is kind of that child-centered progressivism lens, that program that I was in, right? So an argument that sometimes could be made here is that what happens when a student cannot accurately grasp those base level things like reading and writing at such a rapid rate, because those teachers in middle school would throw us the science textbook and the test together at once. We didn't talk about liquids and solids once, but here's the test and it's open book, so do it. And you know, we all did, and we all passed, and we probably all didn't deserve to pass. There were, I don't know, in grade 8, I didn't I didn't hand in anything in grade 8 math and I still passed. My teacher, what he said in the time was, if you don't hand anything in, I'm just going to automatically give you a 50 because, even if you're not doing it, I imagine you would still get 50 on it. And that is 100% the child-centered progressivism lens, the being able to look at every individual and assess their personal needs in the moment in order to have them succeed through this social institution. And that is child-centered progressivism. However, sometimes, and then another argument against this too, is it can create a bit of a class system, which does get a little bit messy and dangerous as well. So this class system can have longstanding impacts on students who were either in what was seen as a public school versus a charter school or a private school. And sometimes there's a little bit of complexes that are built there. So that can extend out into communities and make a bigger impact as well. But with that math example, right, through the social efficiency lens, I would have failed, right? Because I wasn't actually doing that work. So looking back now, when I went through that child-centered progressivism lens, I was so happy because I felt like I got out of work and didn't have to do a lot of hard work, which I was really looking to do that in my teen years, as most teens are, I think. I don't know what would have affected me best because I only had this one experience. But if I was in a classroom where the teachers made us do everything in addition, or I just was in a program that didn't have the fine arts focus and would have spent so much more time on like sciences and maths, I don't know if my life would have been different. It probably would have. This child-centered progressivism lens, this is exactly the kind of theory that is behind this idea of charter schools being able to build a school and bring students to it that can benefit from it in a way that is kind of unique from a public school. When we were looking at the tree of all of the different educational options, there are some teachers in public schools who have focuses on outdoor ed or Indigenous education or fine arts, or building strong women and leaders, right? There are little pockets of knowledge throughout public schools of people who do bring that to the table, sometimes on the school-wide level. In schools that I've worked in, I've brought my Indigenous knowledge and passion to the forefront of the entire school, and it did appear as if we had an Indigenous-focused school, but we didn't. It was an Indigenous-focused teacher. So the difference that I see here with the public schools versus the charter schools is that instead of having that one teacher as the pocket of knowledge, you now have an entire school that is focused on that one thing. And if that one thing is beneficial to their students, that can be really meaningful. Our last educational theory that we are going to look through today is called Essentialism. We're only packing the essentials here. You only need to learn how to read, write, and do math. That's it. We only need the essentials while we're in schools. If students receive a traditional essentialist education, then society will flourish. All students receive the same education no matter their ability or where they're from. So the main differentiator here, and one of the things about essentialism that I think is really important to note, is that this idea of the role of teachers and what teachers should be doing in classrooms. This is really prudent to this conversation about charter schools as well. So essentialists in education do not think that teachers should be providing a moral education to their students. Teachers often call it the hidden curriculum, right? It's the way that you interact with others. It's the way that you interact with your world. It's the way that you show up in the world that has nothing to do with reading, writing, and math. The responsibility of making a student into a good person is not the teacher's role in an essentialist view. It takes that and it puts it back on the parents because they are the ones that should be providing that moral education. Because parents, not politicians, know what's best. Aha. That does fall in the similarities of this theory, but it doesn't follow all of the essentialist theory because it can't, because charter schools are differentiated. There is so much learning that happens in specific charter schools that goes way beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Building strong women and girls, that's not reading, writing, and arithmetic. Neither is Indigenous education or fine arts, right? So there are pieces of the essentialist theory that line up with this idea of Bill 15 in charter schools, but not all of them. But I do think this is a strength to this theory, even though I don't necessarily agree with the rest of it. This is something that I've struggled with as a teacher in Alberta, right? Because me just showing up as my authentic self is basically a lesson on inclusion. Just now, like, I did make the active choice to have this face on during the recording of this podcast. The way that you show up in the world versus what is on your agenda is very different here. And this idea of the teachers being the ones responsible for delivering this hidden curriculum, This is an argument that happens across the world because sometimes there are moral values that get passed down to students from leaders. And it's not necessarily because you're sitting down with an agenda and this is what I'm going to teach today, but it's just going to be the way that I show up in the world, right? So having a face that's painted like this, coming with nails or like a fan or anything that breaks that gender binary or anything that goes against the traditional gender norms, that was my experience because I don't show up in the world in a particularly masculine way. I do go against the grain a lot. And that was seen in that context as me passing off my queer agenda onto these students, when in fact, I was just existing in the world, right? So this is a strength I see of essentialism because it should not be on the teachers to provide a moral education. That should be upon the parents. But I think the problem here is that if we think about 50 years ago, I don't believe teachers were necessarily giving that moral education. I don't think it was as developed as it is now, right? Because the idea is that moral education happened at home, except a lot of that moral education did not happen at home, which was a problem. But then you have those long-lasting generational impacts of people who aren't able to manage their own emotions. And that's really dangerous too, and has multidimensional effects on every member of the community that those people interact with, right? Another part of essentialist educational theory is that people need to do what they're not interested in order to reap the benefits of it later. So it doesn't matter if you're interested, you need to do it, right? It's that kind of teacher vibe where I don't care if you want to do it, sit down and do your math, that kind of vibe, right? And that is definitely not consistent with child-centered progressivism because students need to be driven by their interests. But this is a really interesting argument as well, because how far are you going to push yourself doing something that you're not interested in order to reap the benefits of it later? I think there is an amount. I do think there is an amount of things that you need to engage in your regular life to a point. Because if you're only ever driven by your interests, you might be accidentally ignoring a huge body of knowledge that might be really meaningful to you. And you don't know if it's meaningful to you until you get into it a little bit, right? Like I can say the same thing here for learning these educational theories. At the beginning of these modules, was I particularly interested in sitting down and reading 100 pages of educational theory? No, but now that we're here at the end and I'm sitting here and filming this podcast, I am so very interested by all of this and what's going on here. If I was only driven by my interests, I wouldn't be passing this class. So there is part of essentialism theory that lingers within us all, and that is within the charter school system. Because you're spending time on things that aren't seen as the essentials, it's not the main focus of a charter school. It's not the main theory of a charter school from my perspective. So we've now gone through our 3 educational theories. Social efficiency would not be in favor of charter schools. They would view it as a waste of time, and they don't think that you should be learning anything different other than what you need to succeed in the world at this moment. And all of those extras in charter schools would not be of interest to a social efficiency advocate. Then we have child-centered progressivism, which would absolutely agree with the charter school system because they think that everybody needs to be driven by their unique interests and aptitudes, which is exactly what charter schools are built for. Then finally, we ended with essentialism. And essentialism, there are pieces of essentialism that fit with the charter school system, but not all of them overall. So if we were going to pick one theory that mostly aligns with Bill 15 in charter schools, it's going to be child-centered progressivism. She's going to be the winner. There are elements of the other two kind of sprinkled in, but our main one, I believe, would be child-centered progressivism. So now we're going to have a look at the impacts of arguments on either side of Bill 15 in Alberta. So first of all, we're going to start with Dennis McNeil, and his article is called Opinion. It's time to evaluate public schools versus charter schools. Can't wait. Let's get into it. Alberta is the only province that has charter schools, so one must wonder why. When Canada ranks highly in the Program for International Student Assessment performance results, why would we want to emulate the US approach where they track to a much lower ranking and where the public education system is broken? So a bit of myth busting right away is that charter schools in Alberta are not built in the same way as private schools in the United States. It's not the same. Neither are freely equitable, nor do they accept or accommodate the needs of all students seeking access. That falls only to the public system. This is kind of true and false, right? Because the public system, even if they don't necessarily have the resources, would still accept a new student within the vicinity of the school, right? The charter schools did say that they have to accept you if they do have the resources, but I'm sure they could not accept somebody on purpose and just say that they didn't have the resources, and public schools cannot. That's a weirdly worded sentence. Why has government funding increased when enrollment has stayed the same? Now, this might be because the charter schools are maxed out and they can't and they can't bring anybody else in, so they might be staying at the same percentage because they are maxed out. In light of this reality, the Public School Boards Association of Alberta encourages the government to conduct a thorough evaluation of all legislation and regulation impacting the public school system and the larger K-12 education ecosystem, seeking transparency, equity, and improved efficiencies. There's a very us versus them kind of argument that's going on here, right? Like it's very clear that this person is so far against charter schools. They don't think they should receive the same funding. They don't think it's equitable. They just don't agree that charter schools should be a thing. And a lot of people feel that really strongly. And I'm not 100% sure why. I think a lot of it has to do with misconceptions. In fact, charter and private schools are not required to have a democratically elected board, nor are they required to employ certified teachers or even teach the provincially approved curriculum, although some do. See, this here I do believe is completely wrong, because charter schools and private schools in Alberta, for the most part, do have to hire certified teachers and teach the provincially approved curriculum. What it does say in those documents is that you can delineate a little bit, but you need the specific approval of the minister. This article is making it sound like, oh, they can do whatever in there, and any person can just set up a charter school and ruin all these children's lives, and they don't have real teachers. It's just some quack up there in a dress, and they're teaching the gay agenda. I read through the mandates for charter schools in Alberta, and they are also held to an incredibly high standard. That's why they are public charter schools, because they are still supervised by the public system, by the education minister, Adriana LaGrange, right? All of these things are very closely connected. So it might be notable here as well to mention that Dennis McNeil, the author of this newspaper article, is in fact the president of the Public School Boards Association of Alberta. I'm shocked. Now we'll look at the other side. All provinces, not just Alberta, should allow charter schools. Now this is where it gets interesting, and I really like this. Charter legislation can help even small rural communities save their local schools from closing. That's what happened in the timely hamlet of Valhalla Centre near Grand Prairie, Alberta. When the Public School Board closed the hamlet's only school, community members obtained charter status from the province. Today, the Valhalla Community School is a thriving charter school that serves not just their town, but also students from the surrounding area. This is a beautiful example of child-centered progressivism probably at play. This is such a great example of being in favor for Bill 15, because these students would have had to travel farther to the nearest public school if it wasn't able to stay open with these parents obtaining the charter status from the province. I love it. It's great. In the classroom, the results speak for themselves. Not only do charter schools outperform other types of schools on provincial achievement tests, research has shown that charter schools are particularly effective at improving the academic performance of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Simply put, anybody who wants to help students who often fall through the cracks should be an enthusiastic proponent of charter schools. I would absolutely agree. So many children fall through the cracks in public education, and I do think it's because there is probably a disproportionate amount of high needs students within the public school system and the public charter school system, which I think is probably a big part of finding those kids who fall through the cracks, because I think a big percentage of the children who fall through the cracks are those high needs students, and those students are probably not typically found in those charter schools, which is an important note. Yeah, this author here is clearly a proponent of charter schools. So what I'd like to do next is talk a little bit about the social context of when this bill was introduced into the Legislative Assembly and what else was happening in the world at that time. So if I can bring you back to April of 2020, our world shut down because of COVID-19. So because people were under quarantine and were able to leave, and we went through that year of being able to go out and then wear a mask and then not wear a mask and then bend the curve and all of that stuff, there was this growing idea of anti-mask, anti-vax, the trucker rallies, being able to make your own choice. The government is forcing me to do something that I don't want to do. There were a lot of tensions rising around this time. So you might be wondering why the government of Alberta was using their time to develop and implement Bill 15 in a time when our world was going through a worldwide health pandemic. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at this question that a reporter asked Jason Kenney on March 15th of 2022. So again, we must keep in mind that there are rising tensions. The trucker rallies are happening. People are anti-mask. People are anti-vax. People are really just fighting for their amendment rights in order to make their own choices. That's an important word. And this campaign for Bill 15 was all about choice. Choice was said so many times in all of their presentations. So let's see what this question brings about, and then we'll talk about it.
It's Amber Goslin with the West homeschooling is a reflection of parents saying no to the wokeness of public education?
What I'm trying to illuminate here just a little bit, and I'm not saying that this is true, but I am questioning whether the timeline of it would be consistent with what my hypothesis is, if you can stay with me here for a moment. In this time, when there are groups of people in your province who are upset because they don't feel like they have the autonomy to make personal decisions, and again, with the anti-mask movement, the 1,000 March for Children, the We the Fringe, there are so many special interest groups arising in your province because they don't feel like they have autonomy and choice. And now there's a bill illuminating choice in education, because this was isolating for teachers as well through the pandemic, because we were told as teachers that everybody needs to keep their masks on and we need to uphold this mandate set out by the Alberta government. So then teachers were almost seen as like governmental pawns in that time too, which definitely has long-lasting effects on the relationships between teachers and the communities, right? There has to be a high level of trust there in order to actively make a positive difference in somebody's school life, right? Let's listen to his response now and go from there.
Probably some of that for sure. I think when Aurora was established in the mid-90s, it's because parents wanted a more structured, disciplined approach to education.
Because parents wanted a more structured, disciplined approach to education, they built a charter school. Wokeness and having a structured approach are kind of on this false dichotomy line there, right? What does being woke mean? Something that's really interesting here to me as well is the use of the word woke in a political context like this. Woke is a colloquialism. So essentially what this reporter is asking is she's saying, are people moving away from the public system because they don't want the wokeness that has invaded the public system to transfer to their children? And a big part of this was following government mandates, like believing in COVID-19, getting vaccinated, and equality, and being anti-racist. I'm sitting under the book right now. Like, these things that are viewed as wokeness are often pointed out by people who are inherently exhibiting signs of racism or homophobia. It's really hard to use the term woke in a derogatory sense when not excusing some set of discrimination. Most teachers that I've worked with are great people with awesome morals, and they pass that on to their students.
And when parents set up the STEM Academy in Calgary recently, it's because they wanted their kids to have a real focus on things like science and technology.
So you can focus on science and technology, or you can get away from the wokeness of the public school system. Which one is it? But then you go ahead and define your level of wokeness as well, because if we are looking from the example from the first video that we watched in the beginning of this presentation, is that you can't tell me that there's a lot of woke teachers who work in the Building Strong Women and Girls schools, right? You can't tell me that there's an inherent sense of wokeness in the Indigenous education schools. What is this wokeness? I do suspect that some part of Bill 15 and the reasoning behind Bill 15 was to illuminate to parents that they do have a sense of choice when it comes to their students' education if they were learning things at school that they don't want their students to learn. However, something that's interesting is that not many charter schools have popped up since Bill 15 has been instituted, which also might mean that the government was attempting to give parents the choice if they wanted to, but that choice needed to be acted upon if you actually want to institute some sense of change for your students' education, right? Most people who are anti-woke aren't going to set up a charter school application and put themselves through that. So I don't know, that was just something really interesting to look at here at the end. So yes, this final idea of choice here is very strong within Bill 15. What is the importance of the choice that you're making for your child's education? It can be a really big and meaningful one if you're looking at it through the child-centered progressivism lens. From the social efficiency lens, there shouldn't be any choice in education. It should all be the same. Perceived choice is different from actual choice. So there might be a bit of an illusion building here for people to have a sense of choice, and that might make them more comfortable. Allowing people to have the choice to create their own charter schools is a very child-centered progressivism thing. It would go against essentialism and social efficiency. So these choices, if there are choices, just the mere fact that there are choices reflect the educational theory of child-centered progressivism. So thank you so much for joining me on my presentation of Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act, my final project. And of course, my references are listed here. And until next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye. We have reached the end of my podcast there. I would really love if you would tell me in the comments what you thought of that. Were you interested in something a little bit more educational minded? Because I do have so many different things that I can bring to you from the educational perspective and from the queer lens through the educational perspective. We can do so much here together on D-Talk with Education, honey. So thank you so much for listening or watching. Follow me on YouTube if you want to watch me in Technicolor Smell-O-Vision. I'm here sitting in a nice drag face, so you probably want to get into that. And follow me on Instagram and TikTok for all my nonsense on there. Thank you so much for joining me on this very special edition of D-Talk with David Day. And until next time, goodbye.